Hello and welcome. In this situation report, we're going to talk about the current developments along the front line in Ukraine. Prigozhin is admitting to devastating Russian losses in Bakhmut alone, while Ukraine gets ready for its counteroffensive with new weapons and a pretty impressive propaganda video. This and more in this situation report. In this video, which was published by Salushny, who supposedly is dead now after a Russian strike, which once more the Russian propaganda was portraying wrongly. Here you can see, let me quickly remove this so you see the credits, but I need to keep my picture on it for copyright reasons. If I just let it run without anything from me, I could get in trouble. So let's keep my camera here and you can just let's just watch the 1 minute video together.
Україно, рідна земля мати, Господь, Отець наш Небесний, благословіть. Благословіть! Я йду знищувати! Ворогів землі рідної! Вбив моїх братів! Гвалтівників моїх посадок! Нехай рука моя буде твердою, щоб вбивати ворогів. Нехай око моє буде ясним, щоб вбивати ворогів. Нехай зброя моя буде справною, щоб вбивати ворогів. Нехай воля моя буде сталь, щоб вбивати ворогів. Україно, рідна земля мати, Господь, Отець наш Небесний, благословіть наш рішучий наступ, нашу священну помсту, нашу святу перемогу.
Along the developments along the front line or along the war zone, if you want it this way, we have continued strikes by the Russians, mostly now with drones, but also with cruise missiles. Russia is now hitting the Ukrainian controlled areas almost daily with massive strikes. It seems to be an attempt to make sure Ukraine runs out of its air defense missiles, which was one of the findings in the Discord leaks, that according to them, Ukraine is running out of air defense missiles in May for most of its systems. There was a big prisoner exchange by both the by the Ukrainians and Wagner, interestingly enough. As we can see here, a lot of BMPs here, and that seems to be an M113 with white flags and a big group marching here. The interesting part here is that the exchange seems to have taken place between Wagner and the Ukrainian armed forces, so leaving out the Russians, leaving out the Russian regular armed forces. Among the exchange, also the bodies of two foreigners were handed over to the Ukrainian side. Among that, a former, I think it was Green Beret, who fell in Bakhmut, an American soldier that was a volunteer for the Ukrainian side. In total, Ukraine received 106 soldiers that were handed over, and Prigozhin mentioned that among the personnel he received from the Ukrainian side were several Kadyrovtsi as well, so basically some men of Kadyrov's Chechen forces as well. Belarus and Russia have now signed an agreement about the stationing of nuclear weapons, so as soon as the facilities are ready in Belarus, Russia will now be legally able to deploy nuclear weapons in Belarus as well. Along the northern area, we have a report from the governor of Belgorod, Vyacheslav Gladkov, who said that 7 battalions of territorial defense units have been created. In total, it's 3,000 men that will from now on defend the borders or help defend the borders of Belgorod Oblast. But mill bloggers are saying right now they are unarmed, So while they are at checkpoints together with the border forces, they are not armed yet. The governor himself is saying that he can't buy weapons. That would be illegal for him to use budget for that. And apparently the Russian armed forces have, at least so far, not decided to hand over weapons to those militias. Whether it's because of some red tapes or whether it is that they think they might need them more for future mobilizations is obviously pure speculation here. On the eastern front, north of the Seversky Donetsk, we have not much going on. We have continued reports about some fighting here northeast of Kupiansk. In Novoselivke, there is some fighting around this area now and then reported too, and around Krimina now and then there are some fights happening too. But basically the front line is more or less stable, which shows us that the Ukrainian counteroffensive there has not fully begun yet, and that the Russian counteroffensive north of the Seversky Donetsk has definitely reached its culmination point. South of the Seversky Donetsk, there are reports of fighting around Bilohorivka. Spirne is also fighting happening around Spirne. The Ukrainians seem to have recaptured some minor positions there, nothing big in total, but a bigger counteroffensive must have been successful here at Orikhovo-Vasilivka. We have a Russian military blogger showing us a map and claiming that they were forced back 1 kilometer, as you can see here. And if we compare the map, you see that characteristic tree area which is here, and according to him the line would be in this regard probably somewhere here. So in total we see that even here they according to him they have reached the road almost completely here. So this shows us that the deep state map is incorrect, at least according to this blogger, which is one of the bigger pro-Russian military bloggers. So there might be some truth to that map, but at least according to him, the Ukrainians have had additional successes north of Bakhmut over the last few days. There's also fighting around Kromove, Russian attacks here, but they supposedly have not achieved anything. The Ukrainians actually say that they still are somewhere in the southwest of Bakhmut, and at least if we believe the map here, there seems to be one position here that could still be contested, so where there might still be a Ukrainian soldier or two, and we see that there's a tree line right behind it, so there might actually be, for whatever reason, that the last 3 houses of Bakhmut might still have some Ukrainian presence, even though that won't change anything about the overall outcome of this particular battle. Bakhmut has fallen to the Russians. There cannot really be a question about this. Also, there are reports of Russian attacks in the direction of Ivanivske, no reports of successes, and there seem to have been some minor successes in the direction of Klishchivka, but at least according to some intel, the gains that were reported in this area might not have happened, so it's unclear, but clear is the Russians still control the high grounds above Klishchivka. Nothing has advanced in any serious way in the south of Bakhmut. Further south in Avdiivka, we have additional fighting being reported, especially Novokalinove, so Russians still try to push in that direction. Sometimes they are successful, mostly they are not. I have not heard about any recent successes in this regard. Some direct attacks on Avdiivka, probably from Kuta Balka, where there have been attacks in the past. There's also fighting around Vodiyane here, Pervomaiske and Nevelske. No confirmation of successes by the Russians at all in this area. And we have a report of the area that the Russians have destroyed the, what is this? That the Russians have destroyed the dam here. They have destroyed the dam here, flooding the lower areas. We have a video here of the exact position, somebody walking there, and in a moment you will see that the water is emptying out. You see the flash flood, I think it's been called, like the water emptying out here, and you see the damage here. Let me quickly move forward. You see how much water is going down here and the damage to that dam. Okay, if he is willing to hold stable, there we can see it really well. We also have some pictures here. Where is it? Here we have some pictures of the dam and its position. And interestingly enough, the general staff of the Ukrainian armed forces is saying that it was an S-300 doing that damage. Now, this is interesting because generally the S-300 are assumed to be fairly inaccurate, as they are not meant for precision strikes on the ground. But there it seems that the Russians have more or less been able to strike a target at least 15 kilometers away, fairly accurate, and actually do enough damage to breach the dam to make it flood. They say this road, the dam, was used for resupplying Pervomaiske. And as we can see, this is likely the truth, as one of the better paved roads is crossing right across the dam. So having struck it down will definitely worsen the supply situation at Pervomaiske, at least temporarily. Further south, we have reports about fighting ongoing in Marinka, and there we have some geolocation of Russian successes. We just to more or less geolocalize it. This is a geolocalization from where a tank shoots further to the west. So unless he's in the absolute front line, the Ukrainians should be further pushed back further west than this. And as you can see, this is here. This is the turning of the road, and it's exactly at that position here. So it is here, meaning the Russians are probably solidifying their positions a little further west than the main road, but you can see how much of Marinka is still holding out after 14-15 months of war as of now. From the southern area, there are no further reports of Russian or Ukrainian attacks when it comes to Western Donetsk or Zaporizhia. Basically, what is happening from both sides along the front line here are mostly strikes in the rear of the opponent. We have several reports about Russian usage of bombs, mostly probably glide bombs that are being dropped and used to strike Ukrainian targets, and the Ukrainians strike with HIMARS and with Storm Shadows in the Russian rear themselves. Generally, we have information about the situation around Bakhmut, further information. Russian sources are saying that additional forces arrived there, mostly DNR troops. They are increasingly entering the city, likely to replace Wagner troops that are being withdrawn. Prigozhin is himself saying that the troop rotation is currently happening. Before that, he said in an interview, Wagner had 10,000 lost 10,000 fallen convicts and an additional 10,000 fallen regular mercenaries, which are considered generally to be fairly well trained. Out of 50,000 recruited mercenaries, 20,000 have fallen, 20% have fallen, so 10,000, which shows some kind of losses that the Russians have faced here. In 9 years of Afghanistan war, the Soviets lost 15,051 men, and as we all know, the Afghanistan war broke down the Soviet Union, and in Bakhmut alone, Wagner has suffered more losses, more dead than the Soviet Union in 9 years of Afghanistan war. We have Girkin here mentioning this, and he says that the numbers don't add up. He talks about 50,000 prisoners, but only 26,000 received a pardon. That means 14,000 are still missing. They are either fallen or missing, or they are invalids somewhere in some hospitals, even though invalids should have received some kind of pardon as well. So the likely losses are significantly higher than what is initially said. According to him, it's probably more than 40,000 losses that were occurred by Wagner in Bakhmut alone. 40,000 in this town alone, in this city alone. The 58th biggest town in Ukraine is obviously showing in which direction the Russian offensives have been successful, or how little they have been successful, suffering this heavy casualties in such small again. In his interview, Prigozhin was also demanding a total martial law. He was also asking for general mobilization of the economy, and that Russia is has to become a totalitarian state like North Korea. The border should be closed down at least until the victory against Ukraine was achieved. All of this, he's presenting himself as a hardliner. He did some ludicrous claims as well, like every one of his Wagner troops would be good enough to command a whole battalion or something like this. So in total, he could command 600,000 competent men, efficiently led men, and stuff like this. Currently, the Russians probably have less than 300,000 in Ukraine, less than 300,000 men. There's generally, this interview did not go down too well with the Russian military bloggers, as Prigozhin admitted serious personnel losses, and that obviously is something that the pro-war faction tries to keep under the rugs. We've seen about Girkin talking about it and being outraged about it, while some other mil bloggers said it's good that it's talked about, and the Ministry of Defense should do it as well. Generally, Russia keeps the lid on the actual losses it is sustaining inside Ukraine. There's a video now from the IBAN, the espionage ship that was attacked by Ukrainian maritime drones. We have, let me just see, just to make sure I'm not playing some music, and this is showing that it apparently was hit by a maritime drone. According to this, some claims were it must have been sunk and that the Russians are doing propaganda, but the ship is now confirmed to be back in Sevastopol. In analysis, it seems likely that the fuse and the bombs are not well suited to striking ships. It's a science, a specific science, how you have to attack ships to do the maximum damage. One important example is magnetic fuses on torpedoes, which caused a lot of duds, especially at the beginning of the Second World War, because the realization is if you use a magnetic fuse, you can have the torpedo run lower than with a contact fuse, and thus it can explode under the keel of the ship, basically lifting it up through the explosion and breaking it in half. The alternative to it is the much more reliable contact fuse, but the German Navy and the American Navy, among others, decided to use magnetic fuses, even though they were, especially at the beginning of the war, highly unreliable, and they lost a lot of successes, a lot of potential sinkings because of this, because the exact point how and where an explosion happens is massively important. Bombs, for instance, that are being used against ships are usually not fused for contact, but have a small delay, so they have time to penetrate the hull of the ship and then detonate inside of it. The Japanese did their own in World War II, their own material science, for instance, that the shells from the Yamato were designed in a way that they could use them to not hit a target ship, but actually hit close to it, and then the shell would dive under the ship and dive underwater and hit the ship under the waterline, still powerful enough to penetrate its side armor under the waterline, and thus obviously doing a lot of additional damage by immediately allowing water to enter the ship. So the exact point how a ship and where it is hit, where the detonation is happening, is extremely important, and it seems that the Ukrainians have not figured it out yet. Otherwise, this, which seems to be a certain hit on a Russian ship, should have sunk it or at least damaged it more heavily. But then again, like, it's open air, explosion that is happening over the surface goes the way of lowest resistance, which means the blast probably blows in all directions, but not that much onto the ship itself, which reduces the damage. We've seen it before in strikes by the Ukrainians, that while they make some nice images, the ships so far don't seem to sink when they're hit. So that's something where the Ukrainians definitely still have to work on to improve their efficiency, that either they use some shape charges to blow holes into the ship. They need some way, but just detonating it, and then probably not even directly on the hull, as in the tip there might not be the explosive. The explosive is probably more in the center of the ship. So there will will be some issues that the Ukrainians will still face and that they will still have to figure out, but it seems clear now that the IBAN Hurs has not been sunk. Also, we have some additional information about this, that according to Turkish observers, the IBAN Hurs was 140 kilometers north of the Bosphorus, and it didn't cross it since 2021, so it wasn't allowed to cross through the Bosphorus during the war, while Turkey has closed down the straits. I read about it. I wondered how it's supposed to cross through it. I read some comment that supposedly auxiliary ships would be excluded from it. But if you've seen the last situation report, you might have read out my kind of doubts that I'm not sure how the rules are actually, but an auxiliary ship is still a military ship, so it should still be excluded from crossing the strait. And that seems to have been the case here as well. From the Crimea, we have additional reports of the Russians that they have shot down drones, and no damage reported of it on the Crimean Peninsula, but the Ukrainians still try to fly drones over the peninsula, and the British Ministry of Defense is now saying they have identified 1,053 cases of Russian soldiers going AWOL since the beginning of 2023. AWOL meaning absent without leave, so basically they are deserters or people who don't appear, that leave their unit and don't return. This is already more than it was in total of 2022, and it's obviously a sign of desertion inside of the Russian armed forces. But then again, 1,053, we should put it into some perspective. We're talking about something like 250 to 300,000. 1,000 isn't that crazy much. In many of those cases, the British Ministry of Defense is reporting they are receiving suspended sentences to allow them to return to the front line. Obviously, if you want to use them as soldiers, then you don't put them in prison, you send them back to the front line. The Deputy Minister of Industry and Trade in Russia, Vasily Osmakov, also said the biggest challenge for the Russian industry right now are not the sanctions, but it's actually the lack of workers. Another sign which shows us how problematic future mobilizations in Russia might be, and how much that those 700,000 fleeing the first mobilization wave have damaged the Russian economy already. Russia can surely fight that to a certain degree, but it would have to actually turn to a war economy, including restricting changes of work, including shutting down companies that are not helping the war effort, basically closing in on something like a total war, where the Russians would order workers to move to another place to work in an industrial armaments facility, instead of just having the armaments companies compete on the open market. While Russia can still do that to mitigate the lack of workers, this will obviously be a massive infringement on the civil liberties of the Russian people, which then will cause additional outrage and additional opposition to Putin's reign. So he seems to be not willing to take that step, at least as of yet. And about international support, we have some reports that Ukraine is now asking Germany for the Taurus cruise missile. Germany has those which are low observable as well, so basically stealth cruise missiles. They are being considered to be highly effective and really well, and right now 120 are supposedly ready to use. The rest needs refurbishment. Obviously, the German army has not spent the money on keeping all its Taurus combat ready, and whether they will be delivered or not is not decided yet, but seeing the past, it seems likely that at some point some of the Taurus will be given to Ukraine. Also, there's a report that the second IRIS-T SLM battery has been handed over to Ukraine. Ukraine is also receiving 15 more Gepard SPAA, self-propelled anti-aircraft, and we have a video here of a Gepard shooting down. Let me see, we should not have any sound. So we have a video here of the Gepard taking out
Есть контакт! Есть! Где моя гатей, суку?
So we saw the Gepard hitting drones. They are extremely well appreciated by the Ukrainians as capable of shooting down, especially the Shahid drones, highly efficient. And you've heard the salvos are fairly small, and a straight flying object is obviously fairly easy to take down. And Ukraine is receiving an additional 15-1 out of industry stocks. Sweden, there's a report from Sweden that the Swedes are allowing the Ukrainians to practice on Gripen, their current fighter jet. Gripen is generally considered to be ideally suited for Ukraine, as it's designed to be low maintenance, as it's designed to be maintained by conscripts, not by studied specialists. It's designed to operate from basically under war conditions, from roads. It can be maintained somewhere in the woods. It doesn't have to be in a climatized hangar. Everything like this would be ideal. The problem is there are barely any Gripens available, because most of the nations either would not supply Ukraine or have so few that they basically don't have any they can spare. If you only have 14 of those, how many of those can you give to Ukraine if that's all of your fighter air force? The only nation that has some, that might have some to spare, are actually the Swedes, because they are currently replacing their Gripen with Gripen E, basically a second generation of it with more modern technology and additional capabilities. And this means that their older ones will be decommissioned at some point. But as of now, it seems unlikely that Sweden is handing over some. There might be some window of opportunity at some point, but we are probably talking about one-digit deliveries, as Sweden will not weaken its own air defense on just to hand over Ukraine some fighter jets. Still though, Ukraine is still receiving equipment, and we have the picture here, a first picture of a Ukrainian Sukhoi 24 strike fighter, and it is carrying 2 Storm Shadows. So we now see them actually in a picture on the Sukhoi 24, and we know it can carry 2 at the same time. A picture proof of this, basically image proof, if you want it this way. I hope this situation report was interesting to you. Then please leave the thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithms, as do comments. If you want to help the channel grow, if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. And this channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting me this way. This was it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.